Le festival d'un pays qui a une si prestigieuse tradition littéraire.
Un monólogo interior no es sencillo de hacer una película.
Sonaba su jazz clásico disolviendo las gafas.
Shall not be thinking tomorrow.
I wrote this essay, which is 59 facts about Albuquerque.
Filbita para mí es una exquisitez.
Comparte saberes para los chicos y para los grandes.
Podemos expresar lo que queremos.
Mi cuerpo argentino pretende ser irónico.
El escritor lo es siempre de la literatura que falta.
Hay una cuestión geográfica en la circulación de la literatura, una cuestión de mapas y fronteras, ciertas rutas que lleva tiempo recorrer.
Hola, bienvenidos y bienvenidas al Filba Online 2020 y especialmente a esta entrevista con Jamaica Kincaid en primera persona, que realizará la periodista y escritora Valeria Tentoni. Jamaica Kincaid es escritora y docente de estudios africanos en la Universidad de Harvard. Su obra literaria es sumamente vasta y incluye títulos como Annie John, Mr. Porter y Un lugar pequeño. Y acá en Argentina podemos encontrar Mi hermano y Autobiografía de mi madre, publicados por la editorial Capital Intelectual. Definida como una escritora emocional y auténtica, para Jamaica la escritura no es una profesión, sino que un llamado. La entrevistará, como ya les conté, Valeria Tentoni, periodista, editora del blog de Eterna Cadencia y autora de libros como Antitierra, Piedras Preciosas y Furia de Amante, entre otros, y además una amiga muy querida de la casa y de Fundación Filba. Para esta actividad agradecemos especialmente a la Embajada de Estados Unidos en Argentina y a K&S Films. Los y las invitamos a comentar esta actividad y todas las del festival con el hashtag Filba2020 en sus redes, y así como a suscribirse a nuestro canal de YouTube y también a seguirnos en nuestra página web filba.org.ar, donde están todas las actividades de este festival. Bueno, los dejo y que disfruten la entrevista.
Bueno, welcome everyone. I'll be reading a very brief piece to introduce Jamaica, so then we can start talking. Emotional truthfulness, wrote Susan Sontag before the works of Jamaica Kincaid. In her stories, novels, memoirs, chronicles, or in her young articles for The New Yorker, everywhere we find her unmistakable voice. Its background is a memory that reaches the fierce center of the earth and extends like a galaxy with universal vocation. They are stories about conquerors and conquered, as in our biography of my mother, my brother, A Small Place, or Annie John, but also of the right taken by own hand to venture into the land of the conquerors and enjoy their freedoms, their pleasures, and their luxuries with total irreverence, as in Lucy Among Flowers, Talk Stories, or My Garden. And this is because Kincaid, like her heroines, does not accept to occupy the role that the empire has set for her. She never writes the book they are waiting for. Indisputable proof we find in the last one, See Now Then. Of her literature, it is said that it is furious, angry, even resentful. She will correct them patiently, arguing she only tells things as they are. Merciless, even with herself, I imagine Kincaid standing in the center of the lost paradise, clawed hands shaking the tree of life, the tree of truth. it must be said that Kincaid is also a gardener, with all the humility and all the arrogance that such a thing demands of anyone, that her style is one of a continuous line painter who never picks up the brush between the beginning and the end. Her books seem the product of a single and very deep inspiration, an uninterrupted and fragrant air that comes from her entrails. In fact, her most famous piece, Girl, which is taught in writing schools all around the world, and which was her very first short story, is composed with a single sentence of 300 words. With a masterful pulse, she never leaves the stroke, and nevertheless crosses a whole history, a whole culture, a whole intimacy, and by effect of that manner, you can also find music. When reading her books, I think of someone who blows glass, someone who turns transparency into that dangerous orange matter, someone who molds in that infernal heat and only then lets it go. Jamaica Kincaid polishes the words over and over like a river to the stones at its bottom, and she does it until they are soft as the water that guards them. But we all know, and I suspect she does too, now we'll ask her, that any of those very soft stones, if lifted out of the stream, will serve as a weapon. I am very happy and honored to receive today the author of autobiography of my mother. I'm very grateful for this opportunity to Filba and to you, Miss Kincaid. All my gratitude, and to me it's an honor. So welcome in this weird country we are living, which is internet, but we are waiting for you in Buenos Aires, of course.
Thank you so much for those kind words. I kept wondering who the person was you were talking about. You know, why I would hear my name and I say, "Oh, that's me," but
that's you, of course.
Very kind. You know, I'm always afraid of sharing my writing, because then I think people will know what I really think, and I'm never quite sure I want anybody to know what I'm really thinking. But you make me glad that I did.
Yeah. Oh well, I'm happy because yes, like writing is something you've said. I was thinking of starting somewhere else, but now you started somewhere better. Writing is like a place where control is not that much you can get. You've said you write to change yourself when you end the book you've written. Is that so?
I write to change myself.
Yes, you expect to be someone else when you.
Yes, yes. Writing for me is it's a very intimate act, a very intimate engagement, a very intimate endeavor. And as you ask me to think about it, of course, you put me in a position of as if I'm writing. So I'm in thinking about writing, I enter the part of my brain or of my life that I'm writing. So I'm now in a very intimate space. But writing for me is to say things that I didn't know I could say. And it's very significant, I think. Well, I don't know significant, but it is interesting that I changed my name when I became a writer, and I've come to think of it as that I could not write under the name I was given. I had to write under the name I gave myself, so I would be myself. But I when I'm writing, I think of things that even though I'm conscious of them all the time, I don't think of them deeply. But when I'm writing, I think of them deeply. And to think of something deeply is to also think of its opposite. And so in some ways, you know, it's obvious by now that my writing is constantly full of contradictions, because the minute I say something, I can think of the opposite of it. And it seems to me, or it has come to seem to me, that that is inherent in everything. It's opposite. And it's how to reconcile, not to reconcile them, but to reconcile the idea of you and the opposite, and how to be alive and be truthful in that. So, oh dear, how did your question go? I'm writing one of my long sentences.
We love those. Well, I can ask for the beginning. Like, you changed your name, but you were born in Antigua, and then you traveled to the States. How were those days in Antigua? I wonder if you. I know you were a very young reader. You learned when you were like a baby.
Yes. It's
how come?
Again, my mother, the great obsession, inspiration of my own life, is this incredible woman who, very unusual for her time and situation, class-wise. Well, she came from a prosperous family on the island of Dominica, and she left her home disobeying her family and went to Antigua, and but she was quite, for her, educated, and she loved to read, and then she had me, and I was always interrupting her reading. So she thought if she taught me to read, I would like to read as much as she did and would leave her alone. And so she taught me to read, but I didn't know, I didn't realize until much later that that isn't the way people learn to read. For instance, I was taught to read without knowing that there was something called the alphabet. And so, when I went to school, I went to school when I was 3.5 years old. And the reason she took me to school is because I could read, and I still kept interrupting her. So, she put me in school, I would leave her alone. So I went to school, but you could only go to school if you were 5. And I remember her saying to me, now remember, if they ask you, you're 5. And in some ways I would consider, in retrospect, I would consider that my first encounter with fiction, you know, and then making what you would call a lie, a fiction. But so I got to school, and then everybody at 5 were being taught the alphabet. And I was so, I can still to this day remember being shocked that there were 26 letters. And I think it was many years later that I came to really understand the thing called vowels, you know, and because no one had ever told me. She just taught, and she taught my brothers to read that way too, just with words. And this is a word, and this is, it sounds like this. And for some reason, we understood it. So I would read books, the words of, I didn't really understand, but I loved the way they sounded. And I suppose that in, to this day, this love of words, the way they sound, the way they weigh against each other is still with me. I remember that. But the other funny thing is that she must have taught me to read from many books, but the one I remember in particular, that she was reading a biography of Louis Pasteur. I don't know why this woman on a little island, but she was very interested in my physical health, and I suppose I remember it because she said it's from him. Because of him, she boiled my milk, and it was called pasteurization. And so I sort of remember that whole thing.
The word,
The word, yes. And of course, if you think of pasteurization and you think of cows and pastures, I think again, there's always some moment in your life, I think, in which, you know, your whole being just turns on. And if you could go back and, you know, examine every little crevice, every little part, every particle, every, you know, little crack, you would find your real true self. And I think that moment of learning to read from Louis Pasteur and milk and somehow a part of myself is in that moment. Not just a part of myself, but perhaps a foundational part of who I am is in such a moment.
Yes, the music in your writing is like always there, something that the readers are very grateful for, but we keep asking ourselves, like, how does she do that? Like, your books are full of flow. Girl is an example, but you managed to conquer that, like a music, and now you're talking like the way you learned words was something quite strange.
Yes,
quite musical.
It
yes.
was I see now quite unusual, strange. Yes, you know, so that for instance, when I did encounter the books that children are taught to read, since I could read them, since I could already read them, I didn't have to learn to read them. I just began to wonder, what do they mean? What do they mean? So, one book, I think the first book I can remember reading from, and by the way, the little books we had, they were called the Nelson Reader, named after, you know, the Admiral Horatio Nelson. You know, our whole beings, little beings, were infused with British history, really.
Mm-hmm.
So the Nelson Reader, and it had it was a book about a farmer, and his name, now, I don't know how many of us remember this, but I remember it so distinctly because he was so interesting to me, this little character who was the man in the book. His name was Mr. Joe. And he was a farmer, and he had a cow, but she didn't have a name. He had a dog, and the dog was Mr. Dan. And in fact, yeah, I think the Mighty Sparrow has a song about that. But anyway, the dog was Mr. Dan, and the cat was Miss Tibbs. Miss Tibbs, and he had a hen, and her name was Mother Hen, just Mother Hen, and he had 12 chicks, and 11 of them were golden little chicks, and the 12th one was a little bigger, and he was all black. And he had a name. His name was Percy. Now, as I tell you all this, and as I'm telling myself all this, I suddenly begin to see the threads of things that run through my own writing to this day, the naming of things, the color of things, their position, the different things they do. Anyway, Mother Hen, with her 12 chicks, behaved in a very, you know, motherly way. And the 11 chicks were always close to her and being very obedient. But Percy, the eldest of the chicks, and he was considered a chick, but he was bigger and he was black. And he was always doing something that caused his mother to worry about him. And one thing he wanted to do was to fly to the top of the fence. And his mother was always worried that he was too young to fly, and he would hurt himself. Anyway, one day he did manage to get to the top of the fence, and sure enough, he fell down and broke his leg. Don't ask me how a chicken breaks its leg. But he broke his leg. And the sentence was, Percy the chick had a fall. And I was never so wrapped up in such a thing as this Percy the chick had a fall, and then his mother was very upset and so on. But and then we went on to other books which I couldn't remember. But here's the thing. So 3.5 when that happened. By the time I was 7, I could read and was so, gifted, and all my teachers were so proud of me. But I was always misbehaving because I was younger, and the older children would make fun of me, and what you now call teasing and bullying.
Bullying.
Yeah. Anyway, so to distract them from my being the favorite, I would do all sorts of distracting things and find favor with the older children. And would then get in trouble with my teachers. So at 7 years of age, I got into trouble for doing something, and my punishment was to copy books 1 and 2 of Paradise Lost. And for some reason, if you can see the thread of the rebellious Percy trying to get out of the cooped up nest, flying up to the top of the fence, falling, he's black. And so I would say that somewhere in that time, I became politically aware and have always taken the side of Lucifer. I wrote a book called Lucy.
Lucy, of course.
Which draws her feeling of rebellion very much from the biblical story, or the Milton's version of the Edenic fall. So that's all of those things. I think the person you see speaking to you is not much older than that. I always think I'm 7.
Well, 7 is a great age to be forever. I'd like to be 7 forever. 7 is a great age. But you then left to the States at 17 and you 17 or 18 and
no, not 18. Between 16 and 17. I was past 16, but not quite 17. And but to say I left for the States isn't. You were sent. I was sent by my family, yes, to be a servant because, as I've said many times, my family, we had more children than they could afford. And like many families everywhere, the older children get sacrificed, get sent off to support the mistakes that they did not make. And, I was very bitter about it, and somehow got out of it. It's a story of one of those improbable immigrant stories that Donald Trump would like not to have happen.
and were you writing when you left Antigua, or you started to write in?
I wanted to be a writer, but in my imagination, I used to pretend I was Charlotte Bronte because I had, again, in school, as a punishment, I had misbehaved again, and my French teacher put me in a corner and thrust a book at me and said, "Here, read this," again, hoping it would keep me quiet. And I read this book. It was Jane Eyre. And I was not the same person after that. And I didn't know that you could write a book. I just wanted to be her. And I used to walk around pretending I was her. I think from the time I read that book, and it coincided with my adolescent, entering adolescence, I either was Jane Eyre herself or Charlotte Bronte and Jane Eyre. And I knew a little biography of Charlotte Bronte, and so I would combine the miseries and would pretend I was. I wanted to be a writer, but I didn't know that people still wrote books. I thought writing was something that people didn't do after Rudyard Kipling. That was in my reading, because I grew up in what was then still the British Empire, and so Kipling was as far as we got. I never heard of Virginia Woolf or D.H. Lawrence. I had heard of Lady Chatterley's Lover and had even read it, but was very disappointed because it really has no sex in it. It doesn't read it, but I never read. I didn't read a book, a serious piece of literature written in the 20th century, until I was about 19 years of age. And I lived with a family who had a library. I was a nanny in that family's house.
Oh, they had a library? I didn't know that.
Yes, the family I lived with, where the mother was extraordinarily nice to me, and made me the nanny of her children when she needed someone who could drive a car and swim, and I could do neither, but she hired me because she said she thought I would be a good influence on the children, and I don't know if I was, because when the mother and father were away, the children and I would dance, and the neighbor across the way told the mother, when you're away, she dances with the children.
Awesome. And then you brought a camera. You were like, you even worked in Magnum, didn't you?
I worked at Magnum Photos. It was the first one I had. I was a receptionist there, and it was the first job I had after I wasn't a nanny. And looking back on it, I have to say how astonishing it was that they hired a 19-year-old black girl. This was in 1970. I now don't, because people, as you know, in America and maybe in Argentina too, are very hostile to people who look like me. And but there I was, so in 1970, I would have been 21, and yes, I was hired as a receptionist, and I used to go through the files and see all these photographs by Cartier-Bresson, especially, and Robert Capa. Oh gosh, it was an amazing experience, But again, I would get in trouble because in America. In America, I didn't realize that I never really quite had a good understanding of the racial situation in America. I would have understood it better if I'd gone to England, because the English are the English. And so I would have known my place better. But in America, I really didn't know that I shouldn't do this, or I shouldn't expect so and so. I just would apply for a job. I applied for a job at this place, Magnum Photos, and I got it. I don't know how now. But it was a real. But before that, I was studying photography. One of the things that happened after I was sent away from home is I enrolled in school at night. I got a GED. I started to go to college. I decided to study photography. Why? I'm not sure now. I don't know why photography, because I had no real exposure to images growing up, exposure to words. But sorry.
I was thinking, like in Eudora Welty, there are other writers who mixed like photography and writing. Do you think that photography has marked your writing in any way, or do you think that's something you did and then?
I think, well, one thing about the photograph when I studied photography is that I always wrote out what I was going to take a picture of, even if I hadn't seen, even if it was just what you call a snapshot. I always mind what it should be, and a lot of my photographs, I found some of them the other day going through some old boxes. Are sort of still lifes. They're sort of words, really, of people sleeping, of people sitting in the grass, but they have about them a quality of being informed by words, I would say. And I think it was because I didn't know how words would come out of me, because as I say, you know, my exposure to serious writing had stopped in the late 19th century. I thought writing was something people used to do, you know, like people used to be in a horse and carriage and now they're in a car. And that's how I thought of writing. I didn't understand that I could write, or it wasn't just a question of not seeing a Black person writing. You know, I saw, I knew of Black people who wrote, certainly American Black people, but I just didn't think of since I wasn't an American, I didn't see myself in that tradition of writing. I just thought writing was something Charlotte Bronte did, and then there are no more Charlotte Brontes.
No. And then you appeared in the New Yorker, like, and you're the second great place because you were at Magnum and the New Yorker, like, amazing. It's like Christmas forever for.
If only I had realized that. Again, I did not know that Magnum was Magnum Photos. I didn't know. Also, you know, in those days, it was everything was so much more open to someone who might be fresh, as you would say. I think now we live in a world in which everyone is famous or wants to be famous, but the idea of someone just doing something because they are making an effort, and it was cheap to live in New York. Not well, I was always late with the rent, but it was cheap. It was more innocent in some way. The idea of failure wasn't shameful, I would say. To fail at something wasn't. Now, if you fail, you are, you know, you over or something. But so I didn't know Magnum Photos, but I should tell you how I came to writing is that I was at a college in New Hampshire, and I was studying photographs, and as I say, I would write them out. And one day, I was actually studying film too, and one day I saw a film called La Jetée. It's made by an American. He just died, and it's a series of still photographs. It's sort of science fiction, and then in the middle of it, it moves, and then it goes back to still. And it was so moving. It changed my life, and I just got up and left school and drove to New York and said to my friends in New York, "I'm a writer," and everybody said, "Oh, of course." And I started to write. I wrote for the Village Voice, and I got to know a man named George W.S. Trow, who was a writer at the New Yorker. And one day he just took me to meet the editor of the New Yorker. I had, again, no idea that the New Yorker was the New Yorker. I just thought, you know, he said, "Oh, would you like to meet the editor?" And I said, "Sure." And I met the editor, started to write, and when I wrote, they published it. And the rest, as they say, is here we are.
Yes, but there are very different pieces in your work in the New Yorker. There are and a lot of your novels, or even your At the Bottom of the River, began there. You use it to write a lot and very brave writing.
Well,
like
you should, the person who I did write them. But the astonishing thing is that they were published, and it was the editor, was an astonishingly amazing editor named William Shawn, and I would just give him my work, and I remember giving him the short story Girl, and in a kind of defiance, I said, well, this is what my writing is. This is how I write. And he published it, and said a lot of nice things about it. But then I wrote all these other strange stories, which he published, and he published a great deal of my writing. But it's a strange thing, but the New Yorker was my writing school, really. I learned to construct my own imagination, and also, I don't know again how, but I had the courage somehow to stand up for it, so he would ask me to change something because he didn't like the language, and he would say to me, when you publish it in a book, you can put it back the way you like. And I would say, no, I'm not changing it. And I remember once he said to me, we had a big argument over one word, and he said, Philip Roth, Saul Bellow, Salinger, went through a long list of people who had changed things for the New Yorker. And then when they published it in a book, they put it back. And I remember saying to him, well, they shouldn't have. And he published it the way I wanted it. But I'm making myself sound more brave. It was really a kind of fool's thread where angels fear to go. Or maybe again, going back to Percy, the chick, I was always trying to get to the top bar. And sometimes I fell, but I always got up and did it again. In those days, I didn't think of failure so much as I don't think I think of failure so much anymore, or any more than I did when I was younger. I think perhaps I sometimes feel failure as a parent or something, but it's
not in writing.
It's not really a part of my vocabulary at all. A bad review wouldn't stop me, or
I've read in an interview you saying that you even when you read bad reviews of books from other people, you go and read that book that got the bad review. Well,
I remember not too long ago, a book by Salman Rushdie got a very vicious review in the New York Times, and I don't have time to read it, but I bought it just. It was a vicious, uncalled for review in the New York Times. It was practically immoral to treat a writer like that. Just vicious. Yeah. So, and I'm very sympathetic to the writer who gets a bad review.
Because you I don't know if you've gotten bad reviews, not in Argentina, maybe there, but I don't know. But you do get like a lot of questions asked that you've said that men don't get them, or like the questions about autobiography, autobiographical materials, like the gossip questions that no man has to answer when they write their books. Is that so? Because when they ask, where do you get the stories? Where that's a question that everybody gets. I mean, no.
The great autobiographical. I'm accused of autobiography, writing from my life, as if that's a crime. That it's not my life; it's someone else's life, and how dare I? But Philip Roth wrote about his life all the time. He wrote a book called "My Life as a Man." He was once telling me about being married. He'd been married, not to his second wife, to his first wife. He'd been married, and how horrible it was, and how he wished her dead, and then she died. And I said, "Oh my God, that's horrible." And he said, "Yes," and I wrote a book about it. He gave me the book. And the book. John Updike wrote about his life all the time, and no one accuses a man of autobiography. If they do, it's sympathetic. But I don't know. I draw the ire of a lot of people because sometimes they find me angry. Lucy was accused of being angry, or they say I don't write about race, and I don't know. I don't know what I grew up with Black people, so it would be silly for me to say my Black brother, or all my brothers are Black, and all the men I knew are Black. I mean, if I were to say, that Black guy where I came from, which
that's
one?
ridiculous.
Yeah, they'd say, which one? The Black guy. They're all Black guys. But mostly I'm accused of anger. And it would appear that, or sometimes there's a woman who, a professor, critical professor, who seems to have made a career out of writing about my books as literature of trauma, she calls it. And it has its own bit of racism in it, but what can you do? I'm glad I've provided her with a living.
No, well, but anywhere you write anywhere, and you do read the reviews, but you don't care. I mean,
I love to read reviews because, well, if they're good, I quickly put them away because I am, I suppose, unlike most people, I'm very vulnerable to vanity. It's easy to flatter me, and so I stay away from flattery because it will go to my head. So I almost never read a good review, but a bad review is very enjoyable. I have a friend named Ian Fraser, and I'll call him up and read. Look what they said, and we have a huge laugh about it.
It's more enjoyable.
Yes, so they're all worked up about something they know nothing about, and just it's really a sort of hard way to make a living, reading what someone has slaved over, and then to just, you're quick, turn the page, and then say, well, this is the worst thing I've ever read. And I think that, they're good critics, but for the most part, the critic's job is a kind of hell. I feel sorry for them.
and you've written very different books. At the bottom of the river, for example, is the short story books that here we can get it in a translation which is from Mexico, not Argentina. And
does it read differently?
Yes, a little bit, because it's a Mexican-Spain translation.
Yes.
But I hope it gets an Argentinian translation, because it's amazing. At the bottom of the river was a book that got a lot of prizes for you and recognition. How did you then move from short stories to novels? Because I've read too that you don't care about genres that you.
That's true. I don't write in terms of genre, but it's true that the book I wrote about my brother's illness.
This is the one.
This
is at the bottom of the river.
Yes, yes. Wow. The book I wrote about my brother dying of HIV/AIDS is clearly, for me, was a work of non-fiction that there isn't anything in it that is any fact in it that is rearranged or manipulated in any way. It is it's full of metaphors, but for me the metaphors were exact. Yes.
This is my brother.
My brother, yes. So I knew that was not fiction, but a funny thing in it is that my brother had read, the one who died had read Lucy, and in Lucy, the mother aborts a child. And when I was visiting him, we were talking, and he said to me, he mentioned this, gosh, I have difficulty even talking about it. He mentioned that the mother had aborted a child in that book, and he said, was that me? Had attempted to abort a child. And he said, was that me? And I said, oh no, that's just fiction. But it actually, in the novel Lucy, was him. I was thinking of him. Our mother had, there are 4 of us. And she once told me she'd had 9 pregnancies. So, and I always thought it was odd that I was born when she was in her 30s. And it's very unusual for a woman where I come from to have children so late in life. So I've always assumed that I was not the first child she had, her first pregnancy, but I was probably the first to survive her attempts to control her life. I fully support her. I mean, if she had tried to abort me and had succeeded, wherever, well, I couldn't have talked about it, but I would have supported, right now, supported her right to control her life, to take an action that would determine her own fate and her own destiny. So I have no problem with that at all. But in any case, when he asked me about something in his real life that he had read about in a fiction, I told him a lie. I told him it wasn't, it was just fiction. But then when I wrote the book about him, I mentioned the fiction and the book. I mentioned the whole thing, all that I've just described to you. I don't know if the sequence of events, as I'm telling it to you, is clear. But in any case, going back to genres, I mix genres all the time. The one thing I do not do, even in fiction, is to tell an untruth. I rarely believe in the truth. And for me, the truth, it's not, I mean, now we live in a world of lies, of utter lies, which masquerade as the truth, or which is characterized as the truth, or the truth is characterized as fake, and the fake is characterized as the truth. But I think we all know really what the difference is. And I would say that even in my fiction, I'm trying to write a truth. I'm writing a book right now, and I can tell you the first sentence of it. It's called the character is named Cassandra, and she's described as the daughter. The real Cassandra, the mythical Cassandra, is the daughter of Hecuba and I can always mispronounce his name. But I would say that the first sentence is that she's the daughter of Potter, not of that other Paris. Anyway, my real father's name was Potter. So there is the first sentence alone has in it a truth and a reference to a mythological truth. But for me, the important thing is the truth. And I can only write in that way if I'm thinking about something truthfully. And I'm thinking about it in terms of the justice of the sentence, the justice of the words. And I don't mean by the justice of the words whether they weigh correctly in the sentence. I will undo a whole sentence because there's one word in it that doesn't go in with the sentence. And so that way it will undo the whole book if the sentence isn't correct. That's why it takes me so long to write. But yes, I don't make those distinctions. Girl is a short story, but it is actually a collection of facts about my life as a young woman. Everything in it my mother had said to me as I was growing up. But this idea of genre, I think it's only of interest to people who are interested in categorizing work, but people who are doing things are not interested in the characterization, in the categorization of them.
And Girl, I have to ask for an apology, because when I read Girl for the first time, I read it in the New Yorker, and I didn't have a copy of At the Bottom of the River, and I shared it in a festival, and I said it was a poem. I'm sorry, but I thought it was a poem. I truly did. And I tried a translation, and then I knew it was a short story. And then I read something that called me, that you were reading a poem when that Girl poem
yes well
into your mind.
Oh yes, that is a very important part of Girl, actually, of writing. I grew up with a lot of poetry, English poetry, romantic poetry, especially Wordsworth, Coleridge, that whole gang. Of course, Shakespeare. But I had been trying to write something, and the way of writing, she said, she opened the door and so on. I just couldn't understand how to do it. And one Sunday afternoon, I picked up a book. Someone had given my then husband, I think, and me a book of poems for Christmas. We were still practicing Christmas things, and I just started to read it. And it was a book of poems by Elizabeth Bishop, and the book was called Geography 3. It's a slender book. And the first poem in it was called In the Waiting Room. And I don't remember the other poems in that particular book. I know of the other poems. I mean, I knew of her poems, but I don't remember what else was in that book. But I read In the Waiting Room, and I closed it, and I wrote Girl. It was just like that. It was as if she was an angel, a friend, a mother, a divinity, whatever, who just opened the door and let me in. that is exactly how I thought of it. I had been let in by her.
That's beautiful.
Now she's a white woman. This is where all these things are not confusing, but have to be acknowledged that there is good in the world. That was a good thing. Elizabeth Bishop was a good thing in my life, and she was not.
She was not black, and then I'm thinking you've written now See Now Then, your last novel, and before the other novels, Lucy, Autobiography of My Mother, Mr. Potter, all the other ones are very different, and you've spoken a minute ago about the thing you're writing right now, which looks like much more like See Now Then, because you take like mythology and you're like flying other skies and you're choosing other subjects. And I've read that book, which is not available here yet. That book was very different for you to write. Or how was that twist? Why did you decide to go differently, and what was like that like?
Well, it's not that I decided to go differently. I wish I could decide. You know, I mean, obviously I do make decisions, but the thing, it seems to me, with me and writing, it's not so much a decision. There's just something that, and I don't like to do it too much because it's very disruptive. And when I do it, I like to do it very quickly and then get out of it, because it makes for a lot of emotional disruption. But you know, you grow up, you learn. I mean, not grow up, but your world expands. You know, even though one of my main foundations is that book, Percy the Chick Had a Fall, and interpreting Paradise Lost. The way I interpret, incidentally, I hope I said, Percy the Chick Had a Fall is related to the fall of Lucifer, who, by the way, his name is Lucifer. He's the morning light. He's the favorite. So I can't, the interpretation of things, I get exposed to more things. I get exposed to more of the breadth of you know, things. I've been reading, trying to understand what different interpretations people make of Hannah Arendt's phrase, love of the world. And I just was reading a letter she wrote to James Baldwin, repudiating, actually quite condescendingly, some of his thoughts in The Fire Next Time. But she has to be forgiven, because she, just like most Europeans, don't understand the nature of the viciousness that is at the heart of American democracy, if we can call it democracy. It's at the heart of the American experiment, the cruelty and disgracefulness, sinfulness. There are not enough words to describe the horror of it. But that aside, it's interesting to read Love of the World. What does it mean? How do I interpret it? So, you know, when I come across that kind of thinking, it will inform what I'm writing. You know, the book that I'm writing called That Cassandra. A person who nobody believes, but everything she says is true, or will come true. And so the writing of the way of writing Lucy or Annie John or autobiography of my mother can't be applied to this new way, these new thoughts and new ways of looking at the world. It wouldn't, I would be writing the same book, and it doesn't at all interest me to write the same thing. I mean, you know, I never read my own work because I've already written it. Why would it be interest to me anymore? Yeah, so of course it would. See Now Then is a different book. One thing that enters See Now Then was the notion of time, and about being 7. I think it was writing at the beginning of writing that I became interested in what happened. I was looking at a photograph of myself taken when I was 7 years of age, and I remember the moment it was taken. It was taken in the same spot that a photograph of me was taken when I was 2. And when I was 2, I had to stand on a chair to fill in the background. And when I was 7, I can stand on the floor and I'm in scale with the background. And I was wondering what happened to that person, and where is she in me? You know, those Russian dolls that you can unpack, and I wondered if you could do that. And so that led me on to the whole notion of what is time, and you know, so See Now Then, as the title is, you know, I could have called it Time, but but I that's not in. It's the idea that now now is always then. Now is always the past and the future, and
future.
Yeah, and that was very difficult for me. I didn't resolve it, obviously. I'm not a physicist or a mystic, but it was interesting to me to try to figure out how that could be. And so then, of course, that led me into the actual physical understanding of the world, you know, and I got interested in geology and all sorts of weird things. Just trying to figure out where my 7-year-old self fitted in, and all the things that had happened. You know, I'd gotten married, I'd had children, I'd gotten divorced, I'd been this, that, and I just couldn't understand it. So I was, if I can't understand my own time, how can I understand, you know, the Devonic, the Cenozoic, or all these layers and layers. So
crazy.
Yes, it's crazy.
It's crazy.
Yeah,
I was wondering, like the last one, and I can leave you alone and free, since you are a gardener and you just came from the garden, and you've written these amazing books, Among Flowers and My Garden. I was wondering if since you've said too sometime that everything you do is for writing or for use in writing at some point, how does gardening inform your writing, if it does in any way? Or
oh gosh, I do so much of my writing in the garden, in the sense that well, you know, I was just telling you of the frost that came and made everything look as if it had been through a fire. And again, I have pictures of the garden full bloom, and then I took some pictures of all the things just cut down and lying on the ground waiting to be taken to the compost heap. So, you know, I think of that. I think of the way conquest is so pervasive in the garden for good and bad, you know. It provides metaphors, it provides beauty, it provides ways of looking into history, you know. Some things I grow as ornamentals are essential parts of people's diets, like amaranth. You know, I grow amaranth, colorful in different shapes that no person who depends on amaranth would grow, really. It leads me to think of where you are, the garden, you know, where you are now in Argentina, the conquest of that part of the world by the Spanish, by the Spaniards. Oh, I grow something called a Mexican sunflower, and I was wondering if it's all right to call it Mexican sunflower, because maybe people from Mexico might object, because it might be they feel they're being made an object of by calling it the Mexican sunflower. So I wonder, oh well, what to do? All sorts of things will go through my mind. That I just cut down some dahlias, and I remember every time I encounter a dahlia, I remember that it was one of the things Montezuma saw cultivated, and one of the things Cortez saw but never mentions really, and sent back to Europe. And the dahlia is named after a student of Carolus Linnaeus, and we have no memory of the people for whom it was so important, you know, and the people who it was native to, the Aztecs. They used it as a cure for urinary infections because it has a hollow stem, urinary tract, you know. And then that leads me to think of something called the doctrine of signature, which is a European. It preceded scientific medicine. So that's how I am in the garden, just a bundle of thoughts and thinking, yes, and extraordinary pleasure and delight and gratitude, a feeling of I'm so glad I'm alive when I'm in the garden.
That's wonderful. Well, you should definitely come sometime to Argentina and to find some seeds.
Yeah, you have a great lobelia that's so huge. I've seen it in gardens on the West Coast in Seattle. A huge lobelia and some other great plants that I really can't wait to see. I have a friend who goes seed collecting down in Argentina.
Well, you should come with him or the next Filba, because we'll be waiting for you. So we invite everyone to subscribe to the channel and to follow filba.com to follow this festival where you will be still here. And well, I'm very, very grateful, Ms. Kincaid.
Thank you.
I'm very, very grateful and honored. And of course, we'd like the books that are here in Argentina are these two. I can show them to you. I don't know if you've seen your own books.
I have not seen them. And when I look at them, yeah.
And then there are others I have in English, like Lucy or A Small Place, that we're waiting for translations. So everyone, editors, be wise. Well, Jamaica, thank you very, very much. Very, very much. It was a pleasure.
Pleasure here.